Hello, it is my pleasure to be here today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some background about how music affects the brain, and if some of you have very good memories and were here at this conference 3 years ago, there may be some things that seem a little bit familiar to you. But since then, we've made progress. So at the end of the talk, I'll be talking about some data that is hot off the press, brand new out of our own lab. And in fact, I think some of you in this very room may have even participated in some of these data. So I'm going to talk to you today about music and movement. And this is something that you don't have to explain to people very much. There's something about music that makes us want to move. And my favorite example of this is just a little video I stole from YouTube of a little cockatiel called Snowball. So if you have a look at Snowball's behavior, give that a play. You can see he's picked up more than just a few dance moves. He has some real showman moves there at the end as well. So this is a behavior that I find fascinating and has driven my research over the last 15 years. Why is it that a simple sound can produce movement? We don't move to other sounds in the environment. If I hear a truck backing up on the road outside and it goes beep, 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 I don't suddenly find myself, oh yeah, this is great. But with music, it's a sound, and suddenly you can find yourself spontaneously moving. What's also interesting about this behavior is it emerges very early in development. Moving to music is something you can see even in infants. So if you want to know why music is making us move, you have to start to decompose what makes up music. Now, this is a deep philosophical question. I'm not going to get into it that much. But one thing that you can look at is simple things like the melody, the harmony, orchestration. And it turns out these things are not important for making us move. The rhythm is what's key for making us move. People can start moving to music as soon as they hear a simple drum beat kicking in. And as soon as you get that temporal pattern, that pattern in time, da 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 da. These are the things that you need. So this is why in, for example, militaries, when people are marching together, all you need is a good snare drum with a good beat, and people can immediately move together in time. And in particular, what we move to is the beat. So the beat is just simply that steady, regular pulse that we feel when we're listening to most music. Not all music has a very clear beat, but most of the music that we enjoy does have a steady beat. And you can see that this is what people move to, because mostly, for example, if I were to ask you to move along to the William Tell overture however you wanted, you won't see people going da 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 da. You'll see them go da 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 da. So they very naturally just extract that regular beat out of this music. One thing we're interested in is how much people differ in their ability to sense that regular beat. Now, if you attend any sort of, wedding reception, perhaps there's enough alcohol been served that people start to have their inhibitions go down and they start to come out on the dance floor, you will observe very quickly that people do differ in how well they are able to move to the beat. So this is something we test in our own lab, and I'm going to give you a chance to take some of the options from our test, some of the stimuli that we use. So you're going to hear some sounds, and your job is simply to say whether the beeps that come with the music are on the beat or off the beat. So we'll have the first sound. Who thinks that was on the beat? Who thinks that was off the beat? Who wasn't sure but waited to see what everyone else around them did before they raised their hands? So that one is one of our trickiest ones. It turns out that one is off the beat, but only by a little bit. Try the next one now. On the beat? Off the beat? I always wait for those hands so that I can go recruit them for my studies afterwards. But you guys are all really good, so that one is indeed on the beat. And then the third one. On the beat. Off the beat. So that one is a little bit easier than the first one is, and that is also off the beat. So these are the kinds of tests that we use in our lab when people come in and we want to know how well they are able to feel the beat in music. And this will become important later when I talk about some of the work that we are doing, both in healthy young subjects, older subjects, and people with Parkinson's, looking at how music affects their movement, in particular walking. So the cool thing, if you want to look at what's going on in the brain, is that you've already got some inklings here that it's not just going to be a sound or an auditory phenomenon. It might involve the movement system. And again, the fact that we spontaneously move to music is one example of the evidence for this. The fact that it emerges so young, so under 9 months, you can see babies moving to music. And no one has to instruct them that this is what they're supposed to do. You don't sit your baby down on the bed and say, okay, George, so I'm going to play something, and when you hear this, you're supposed to flap your arms around or wiggle or you got to do something. And then when I turn it off, you stop, okay? You don't have to do that. They do it spontaneously in the environment, which suggests that this link between music and movement emerges very early and doesn't require any special training. So this was the sort of background that led me to my first study, which was just to look at whether, if we're looking at brain activity, are movement or motor areas of the brain responding when we're listening to something that makes us move. And in particular, I was interested in the rhythm because that's what makes us move in music. So I was actually most interested in the areas that respond to the beat because, again, that is the thing we tend to synchronize to, this steady, regular pulse. So we looked a little bit at musical training. Turns out all musical training does is make people very nervous about being in your study. So they come in, and they know that you're going to look at their brain and their brain activity, and they know that they're going to listen to some rhythms and have to see how their brain is responding to the rhythms. And what many of them think is going to happen is that after the brain scan, I'm going to say, okay, we need to have a talk. Have a seat. I know you've always wanted to be a professional musician, and your teachers say you're excellent and have great chances, and you've got great feedback from performers, and you're already selling music, but I've seen what's in your brain, and I'm telling you, it's not for you. So there's this concern or this fear that somehow the brain activity will tell me something that will cause them to have to leave the profession. So mostly what happens is we see more activity in the brain of musicians than people who have no musical training, but not necessarily because that's what makes them better. It's often because they're focusing very hard. Please, brain, don't let me down. So what do we have them do? We use an MRI scanner, and some of you may have been in one of these for clinical research. If you have, you know that they are very noisy. They are also not for people with claustrophobia. You go into a tube that doesn't make many people feel comfortable if they have claustrophobia. But however, we're doing this for research, so people can leave any old time that they like. We have to make them as comfortable as possible, and also people aren't there because of a problem, which is usually the context of most clinical MRI scans. So they're there, they're kind of interested in what's happening. We give everybody a picture of their own brain afterwards so that they can see what it looks like. So generally, people are pretty happy to participate in our studies. And in fact, maybe because we test so many undergraduate and graduate students at Western who stay up a little too late, our biggest problem actually turns out to be we lie them down in this nice bed, put some pillows around them to make them comfortable, give them ear defenders to protect against the noise, dim the lights so that they can see the screen, slide them into this nice dark hole of the scanner, and next thing we know, all we hear is snoring. And that's not what we want. So our biggest problem is sleep, so we always have to give people a job to do in this scanner. So the job that we gave people to do here was to listen to rhythms. And they were going to hear 2 rhythms. The first time and the second time, the rhythm would always be the same. And then the third time, the rhythm might be the same as the first 2 or might be different. So they then had to tell us whether they thought the rhythms were same or different. And then what we can do is just look at the activity during that listening phase when those first two rhythms are playing, when they're not making any movements, they don't know what button they're going to push yet because they haven't yet heard the third rhythm. Then we sit them down and say, now, we're interested in what role movement areas may play in rhythm. If you are actually moving in the scanner, that will ruin our study. That won't tell us anything about rhythm. That will tell us motor areas are involved in moving, and we already know that. So please stay very still. Don't tap along, don't count even in your head or imagine tapping along. And then we watch them through the screen that we have set up to make sure that they're actually moving. And then we don't actually play music to them because that would tell us about how the brain is responding to all of music as a whole, and we are just interested in the response to rhythm and to the beat. So we just play them rhythms. So I'll give you a chance to do the task. You're going to hear two rhythms and then a third one. You decide if the third one is same or different. And I think you'll agree these are not rhythms that necessarily make you want to jump up out of your seat and dance. So we'll have the first sound. Same or different? Good job, it is different. So you can see you do have to pay attention in order to be able to do that task. You can see we are not using the Backstreet Boys that Snowball loves so much. We are using sine tones. And we ask people to stay perfectly still. Now, one thing you might have noticed about that rhythm is that it had a beat to it. That is, it was possible to feel a steady pulse. Dun, da, da, dun, da, dun, dun. Or if you've already had your morning coffee, dun, da, da, dun, da, dun, dun. Quite easy to feel a regularity. We also tried rhythms that were less regular, and that was because I really wanted to see what happened when it was a rhythm that had a beat compared to a rhythm where the beat really wasn't as clear. So I'll give you a chance to try one of these less regular or less strong of a beat rhythms. Second one. Oh, I think that might be the same one again. I think that was actually the same trial. So the less regular ones might have been something like da, 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 da. So not impossible to feel a beat in, but just not as clear at all. So then, as I said, we look at what's going on in the brain when people are just listening. And not surprisingly, so this is a view of the brain as if you've just taken off the top of my head, you're looking down, you have auditory cortex located conveniently right by the ears, and you'll see that we get auditory cortex processes sound, we get sound processing areas while people are listening to rhythm. That is not earth-shattering, that's a good sign, it means people could hear the rhythms and their brains were responding to the sound that we played them. What we also looked at was in the rest of the brain, and here's a view as if you've just taken off the front of the brain entirely and you're looking on it. And all of these other areas that we're seeing, the supplementary motor area in the middle, the premotor cortex on either side, the basal ganglia deep within the brain, and then the cerebellum, which isn't shown but it's in the back. These are all motor areas. These are all areas related to the timing and selection and initiation of movement, even though people were staying perfectly still. So this tells us that the motor system is responding when we're listening to rhythms, even when people are not moving. And when we look at the area that responds most to feeling the beat, when you had that rhythm you could feel a steady beat in, we just see the basal ganglia. So the basal ganglia is responding the most when people get this regular, steady beat. And I'll come back to that later. Now, how do we know that's what's going on in music? These are these funny sine tone rhythms that are not very engaging. So we can actually make that direct comparison. So this is just another view of the brain just looking straight on. So the supplementary motor area is right at the top there, premotor cortex on the sides, auditory cortex, and then you can see the basal ganglia in the middle. That's our rhythms that people are listening to. So here are the motor areas that we see in response to rhythm. The little dots at the bottom on the side, that's the sound processing areas, so we're getting auditory. Here's the same view when people are listening to this. So we're getting exactly the same motor areas responding in music as we are in rhythm. Now you'll see the music is also getting more auditory or sound processing areas responding. That's not too surprising given the complexity and richness of the melody and orchestration and harmony that's going on in the music. So it seems that what's happening when we listen to rhythm is that our motor systems are responding, and this appears to be the same thing that's also happening in music. So can we use this for something? Is this any good, or is it just some cool thing that our brains do? Oh, cool, a movement, music, neat. Well, I probably wouldn't be here if there wasn't any therapeutic application, so you can have a guess at that. So we know that movement areas are commonly affected by stroke and various degenerative diseases, and again, Parkinson's is a typical example. As you know, there can be difficulty with initiating movement or freezing and unsteady gait, and the core brain areas that are affected in Parkinson's include the basal ganglia. And now the basal ganglia was this brain area that really responded to the beat. So can we use listening to beats to help alter what's going on in the brain and subsequently improve movement? This is a video. You can find it on YouTube. I've tried contacting the patient to discuss it with him, but he's never gotten back to me. He just uploaded this video, and it's just him walking across his living room once on his own and then once listening to music. So we can play that now. So you can't really hear what he says here, but he just talks about, so this is an example of freezing. And then he's going to go off the screen. Obviously dramatic change. Now he's just showing off. So you see something like that and you think, wow, that's amazing. Just like so many other things on YouTube. Is it real? So you really don't know until you go and look in the scientific literature. And when you look for scientific evidence for music aiding movement, you see that there are actually a lot of papers that are looking at gait or walking, and they're trying to measure how music is affecting gait or gait parameters. Now, one thing that I'll tell you is if you go looking in the literature for information about this, instead of just calling it listening to music or does music affect gait, you'll hear it called rhythmic auditory stimulation. And that's because it sounds way more sciencey, and it's much easier to get grants if you're studying rhythmic auditory stimulation than if you're studying music. So that's what you have to look for. So what is gait? Gait is simply the way that we move about the world using our limbs. And there are various gait parameters we're interested in changing, particularly in Parkinson's disease. One is the stride length, which is just simply how long your steps are. The other is cadence, so the number of steps per unit time. So are you one of these people who takes short, fast steps, or you do take longer, slower steps? And then velocity, how quickly are people moving? And this is something that often people are interested in improving in Parkinson's disease. So this is just simply a picture describing what we're looking at. So what we use is a sensor mat that measures your footsteps and can automatically measure the distance between each foot, the timing that each step is taking, and a whole bunch of other parameters that we then look at. So I don't think that video works. So we're just going to skip straight to what rhythmic auditory stimulation is in the scientific literature. And that's the idea that listening to music with a strong rhythmic pulse or very clear beat while walking may enhance walking tempo, so the beat rates of your steps, so it can make them more even. It can enhance balance and control of muscles and limbs. And generally, the stimulus, you can either just listen to it right then and there and look for immediate improvements, as we saw in that video, or you can use it with a training aspect where you listen to the music and walk to it and hope that the practicing of walking to music and the improvement in gait that you see when that happens becomes learned and transfers to situations when you're not actually listening to the music. Now, this is of some videos taken from a scientific study. This is, again, a patient walking. His job is to go to the far wall, touch a touch the button on the wall and come back. And this is without anything going on in the background, so we can play this video. And so you can see there the patient is experiencing some freezing. Now in the next video, you can't hear it on the video, but there's a steady metronome playing in the background at tick, 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 tick. And his job is to do exactly the same thing again. We'll play this video. Yeah, and there's no sound. They didn't provide sound with these. So you can see for that patient, it was a big change. And then there's a second patient, exactly the same thing. We can play this video. This is with nothing going on. It's completely silent in the background. And again, some freezing, which is common with doorways, which is why the doorway is hung there to try to challenge the walking. And then this is the same patient again, now with a steady metronome happening. We'll play this one. So that looks a little more promising, and it's done in a scientific laboratory as opposed to on YouTube in somebody's living room. But you still have a problem. So these are just two graphs, and in the gray bars, you see patients walking without any sort of metronome, and in the white bars is the walking with a metronome. And on the left side, you've got how long they spent freezing, and on the right side, you have the number of times that freezing was experienced. And you can see without any stimulation, some of these patients, so particularly patient 3 and patient 10, are experiencing a lot of freezing episodes, and so they spent a lot of time being frozen. And that when the metronome is playing, both patients 3 and 10 freeze substantially less. So it makes a big difference. And then you can see some of the other patients, like 8 and 9, also freeze less. But the difference isn't quite as high. And then there's some patients for whom it makes no difference at all. And this is a real characteristic of much of what we see in the literature. It's really promising for some people, but it varies tremendously across different individuals. And this is a real problem because when you look at studies in the literature, they all vary in the way they provide the stimulation. Some, as we saw here, those videos use metronomes. Some use music. Some use music that the experimenter might fancy themselves a bit of a composer, so they make a piece and then everyone has to walk to that particular piece that they've made. Sometimes patients bring in their own music, and nobody is making comparisons across different studies because the studies are all so different, it's really hard to compare them. In addition, nobody ever looks at the musical abilities or capabilities of the patient. So one thing that when you were doing that test at the beginning and we're looking at beat perception ability, we know that this tends to go down in Parkinson's disease. Not all patients have problems with beat perception, but more do. And just any old person in the general population, there are a whole bunch who are not great at feeling the beat. Yet most of these therapies ask you to synchronize your steps to the beat. If you don't have a very good sense of where the beat is, or it's hard for you to find the beat, and we ask you to synchronize, we've just given you a hard task to think about at the same time as you're trying to walk. And even healthy people shorten their strides and walk a little slower when they're doing a hard task and trying to walk at the same time. So of course this isn't going to be beneficial for people who have problems with beat perception. So these are some of the questions that we're addressing in my lab. Should we be telling everybody to synchronize to the beat? Let's look at what people bring into the lab themselves as their own abilities, their own ability to feel the beat, their own experiences with music, and their own musical preferences, and then take that into account when we're trying to look at the effects of what we're doing. The other thing is nobody knows what musical features are actually helpful. People assume it's the beat for all the reasons that I've shown you. The beat activates the basal ganglia, people move to the beat, so these are likely the things that are improving movement. But nobody has actually gone out and out and tested that yet. So this is our lab. We don't use anything that attaches to the patient. We just use a mat on the floor, and sometimes we will also video, depending on the study. And this enables us to take movements that are a little bit more natural than if you're wearing a lot of cables and having things hanging off you. It's still walking in a room back and forth on a carpet, which maybe isn't the most natural thing. But it turns out that if you look at most of the walking that people do, it's actually not too different from that. We take short trips where we go from the living room to the kitchen, or we go from the kitchen to the bedroom. So some of our walking is longer trips that we might take, but a lot of what we do are short little walks of about 40 steps or less. My clicker doesn't like me anywhere. Oh, there we go. So what we have found is that we play people music, and we've been looking at different musical features. And one of the first things that we've noticed is that when you tell people to synchronize, that doesn't always help. So here on the left, we have stride velocity, so how fast people are walking. In the middle is step length, so how long a step they're taking. And on the right is double support time. This is how long they spend in the part of the walking phase where both feet are on the floor. In general, what we're trying to do is increase the speed, the velocity on the left, increase the step length in the middle, but not increase double support time. And in the blue bars, we have people who are instructed to synchronize to the beat of the music they were listening to. And in the white bars, we have what we call free walkers. We just simply mean they're not instructed to do anything. The music plays in the background, and they don't have to synchronize their steps to the beat at all. And what we have is the change in each of these three parameters from walking in silence compared to walking in music. So as you can see, in the two blue bars on the speed and the length, people are actually walking more slowly and taking shorter steps when they are told to walk to the beat. So if they were walking exactly the same as they were with nothing going on in the background, they would just be at this, you probably can't see this, they would be at 0, this black line at the bottom there. I'll show you here actually. Nope, that's fine. So what we have is when we instruct people, their stride velocity goes down, their step length goes down, and then on the right side, their double support time goes up, which is not what we want. However, people who are just walking freely to the beat, you can see in the white bars, are walking faster, and then in the middle, they're taking longer steps than those who are instructed, and their double support time doesn't change very much. So that suggests in this group of people, actually telling people to synchronize was not helping. They were doing better if we just left them alone and let the music play in the background. Now, what we can do is look at different individuals and look at how they did on that beat perception test that you all took at the beginning, where you're deciding if the beeps are on or off the beat of the music. And if you divide people into two groups, those that don't do as well on that test and those that do better on that test, you can see that the effects, people who are getting worse, are much worse when people have a poor beat perception. So this is only the times that people are asked to synchronize. And you can see in green the people with poor beat perception ability. And they are, both for stride length and stride velocity, taking shorter steps and walking more slowly. Those with good beat perception aren't really changing from when there's nothing going on in the background. So if you have good beat perception and you're told to synchronize, it doesn't seem to help you, but it's not hurting you. But if you have poor beat perception and we tell you to synchronize, then people's step lengths are lower and they walk more slowly. And this is true for everybody who's coming into the lab, not just people with Parkinson's disease. So this is true for young and healthy college students who are coming in, for older adults coming in. So if you don't have a good sense of the beat and we tell you to synchronize, your walking gets slower and you take shorter steps. And then you heard a little bit about our groovy music. So I don't know that it's the best term, groove, but I didn't choose it. So about 10 years ago, people started trying to analyze in music what makes people want to move. Let's try and look at the acoustics of it, what makes people move. And they termed that, does this make you want to move, groove. So what we mean by groove is you have said, yes, this is music that makes me want to get up and move. We're still looking into what groove is. Certainly it seems to have certain characteristics, like the music tends to be high energy and upbeat. It tends to have a pretty clear beat to it. But what we find is that when we play people music with high groove versus low groove, so the low groove music is on orange, and the high groove music is in white. And you can see that the stride length tends to get shorter, and they tend to walk about the same as if there's nothing going on when we play low groove music. With high groove, the stride length gets a little bit longer, but they actually are walking faster. So when you play people music that makes them want to move, they are walking faster. And the double support time, so again, this thing that we don't want to go up, is actually decreased in the high groove music. So just how much the music wants to make you move can be an easy way of finding musical features that help people. So as I said, these are the hot off the press data. We're doing more. So we are currently doing our very first studies of brain imaging with patients to look at how their motor systems respond to music and rhythm. How does this work in patients? And can we look at what's going on when we're examining the music that works the best for a particular patient and see what brain areas are being engaged? Nobody knows how this system works. No one has any idea which brain areas are increasing their communication or boosting their activity when people are listening to music that improves their walking. And I find this a very fascinating question. Then what we can do is look at the music that's optimizing these motor responses, see which motor responses need to be optimized, and see if we can find additional ways of doing that. And then we're also looking at other features that make us want to move. So what about familiarity? It turns out when the music is familiar, it also improves your gait, not as much as the groove. Groove seems to be the biggest effect that we're finding so far. And we're currently doing with a student in my lab this year, looking at how much people enjoy the music. If this is music you really love, is it more effective for gait? And what we really are trying to do is optimize the effects for specific individuals so that we're not applying this single metronome to every patient, or this one-size-fits-all music, or this one-size-fits-all instruction of you must synchronize or you must not synchronize, but finding what works for each individual. So I'm just going to end on a more speculative note here. This is often a question I get at the end, which is, why does music make us move? Okay, you've convinced me it does. I don't dance personally, but you've convinced me that it makes a lot of people move. Fine. Why would this ever have come about in the first place? And this is an easy question to come up when you think about how we have music in our current environment. You don't have to do any movement to get music. You just press a little button, so tiny little thumb, and you can have whatever music you want out of your shuffle or your phone or the radio. And if we go 30 years ago, okay, you had to press a little harder, but you still didn't have to do very much, and you could have whatever music you wanted at any time. And we go 150 years ago, and you have to move a little longer and a little more, but you still really, if you want to hear music, you don't have to do very much at all. But if you think about what the environment was like when music evolved, there was no way to make music without moving. If you wanted music, you had to drum, clap, sing, play some sort of instrument. So there was no way to make music without moving. And we know that people find music rewarding, so if they wanted to hear it, they wanted to have it, they had to be moving to make it. And this is reflected, there are some cultures today that are more hunter-gatherer cultures than our current one, and they often don't have different words for music and dance. The idea that these would ever have been separate to them is completely foreign. So this is one of the reasons we think that music has such strong effects on our movement systems, is that's how it evolved. Again, speculative, but interesting, I think. So just to sum up, we are moved by rhythm, especially the beat. That's the thing we tend to move along to. Hearing rhythm causes activity in motor brain areas, and the beat in particular activates the basal ganglia. Music and rhythm may be able to help movement disorders, but a lot of research remains to be done, and really I think optimization for individual patients is what's going to be crucial here. So thank you all very much for your attention and all of the very generous organizations and bodies that have supported this work.